Most of the material in the elasticity chapter boils down to calculating elasticities. And, there's something to that, but it's the type of thing that's not that hard to see how it's done and to practice and to be able to calculate an elasticity. The harder thing is, and the more important thing about elasticity is to understand what about demand and supply functions elasticity is telling us and why we care. So anyway, that's the point of the application exercises I wanted to do in class. We ran out of time. I'm going to give you the chance to do them on your own here. So let's think about application exercise 2.9, the first elasticity one we were going to do in class. Consider the economic naturalist example 4.2 in the Frank Bernanke and a couple other authors' text. I would suggest pausing this screencast here and reviewing that example if you haven't done so already. Okay, now you're back. The question is, which graph displayed in the other monitors, here I've got it in the next page of the screencast, best matches the information in the example? A, B, C, or D? I'm going to go to that screen and pause. I'd like you to pause the video and then come to your own answer, and then we'll answer it together. All right, here's the possibilities, the four possibilities. They're all possible markets, possible depictions of the market for the United States luxury yacht market in 1991. And we'll think about that. So go ahead and pause it. Remember the example. Think about which one best fits the example. All right, we're back. So the example talks about how when the tax increased the price of a luxury yacht market, two things happened. One is that buyers shifted easily away from the yacht market in the United States. So that implies a very elastic demand curve. And we'd note that possibilities B and C feature very elastic demand curves. And then the question is, which of B and C provides the best answers? And we know from the article that a big drop in the quantity of luxury yachts came about because of the tax. And so that would imply answer B. And so while the tax collected some revenue, the fact that so many workers were laid off, the loss in income tax was even bigger a lot bigger than the increase in sales tax revenue. And you see the attraction. Oh, rich people buy luxury yachts. Let's tax luxury yachts. There's no poor person that's going to be affected by that tax. This is a winner. But in the doing, because luxury yacht owners could go buy their yacht in Monaco or wherever, and they were quick to leave the market, and the suppliers didn't have any way to drop price by far enough, and suppliers ended up shutting down as well. So both the supply curve and the demand curve were highly elastic. That other element affecting revenues was the layoff of so many workers because of the drop in buyers. So if we were going to analyze this tax, their tax was, say, here. So quantity went down from Q0 to Q1 quite a lot. And here I've drawn a case where the buyer and the seller, P1 is there, and pardon my P1 minus T, Remember that vertical distance is the tax. Anyway, we see a big drop in quantity. Notice, I'll let you do it yourself. All these other cases, that same size tax wouldn't feature such a big drop in quantity. Just for an example, look here. Hardly any drop in quantity when both the supply and demand curve are highly elastic. All right, let's do one more. Markets for agricultural products like hazelnuts, wheat, and tomatoes tend to feature a great deal of price volatility. Which of the following reasons best accounts for that observation? A, both demand and supply in such markets is highly elastic in the short run. B, both demand and supply in such markets are highly elastic in the short run. C, demand in such markets is highly inelastic. Supply in such markets is highly inelastic. And in the real short run, both demand and supply is highly inelastic. And you can get there two ways. One way is simply just logic. Okay, if I'm thinking about wheat, say, just to pick a market, whether wheat's expensive or cheap, I'm going to make my kids a sandwich every day, and that's I'm going to use 2 slices of bread for each sandwich. That's my main source of, that's the main way I use wheat. So my consumption of wheat doesn't change much with price, nor does it with income, by the way. Bill Gates probably eats about the same amount of wheat that I have, even though he has fantastically much more money coming in every year. But it's, he might eat out a lot, so the wheat's more processed, but in terms of the wheat content of his diet, it's about the same. So there just isn't much quantity response when price or income and other things change. Our habits of eating, how much we eat, stay about the same. So demand is certainly inelastic. Supply is actually quite elastic if we're year to year, but within 1 year, I guess we can think about the short run as being shorter than 1 year. If I've got my crop of beans planted and the price changes dramatically in June, well, I can't rip up those beans and plant anything else. I'm sort of stuck. So in the short run, we see both supplies. In the medium run and the longer run, we see an inelastic demand and a very elastic supply. So C would be a credible answer too. Either A or C could be defended easily. B and C are just out. And let's show you the graphics of that. Let's think about supply curve. It's just a supply curve. And then I want to really emphasize the difference between an elastic demand and an inelastic demand and price volatility. Because it's mostly coming from the demand side in ag markets, at least when we're beyond the time frame of one growing season. Let's think about a really inelastic demand. Remember, that's a really steep curve, all else equal, if we're talking about the same units on the same axes. Really easy to manipulate the units and the axes. If you want to mislead your audience, be careful of that. But given that we've got the same axes, we can see how a supply event affects price in the case where demand is highly inelastic, this blue D curve, or in the case where demand is highly elastic, this D prime. Let's think about a supply event. Okay, the U.S. wheat market. Let's suppose that the Midwest gets just tremendous rains right in March and April, and they're just wipe out vast fields of grain. And the way a lot of wheat's grown is winter wheat, and that is you plant it in the fall and then you harvest it in the spring. So by March and April, it's heading up, and the plants are starting to show grain, and they're getting ready to harvest them. Maybe you grow a hay crop in the summer and then plant the wheat again in the winter. So it's a lot of times the way it's done. Anyway, in this case, that kind of rain event would wipe out a lot of the wheat crop, and of course, that's going to create this fall in supply. I've drawn the supply sort of neutral. All right, so the supply has fallen. Well, if price, let's draw the initial price, P naught, initial quantity, Q naught. If demand is very elastic, the green curve, the flat curve, price is going to go up, but by relatively less compared to the case where if demand were very inelastic, that is the steep demand curve. So price is going to move a lot in the presence of a steep demand curve. And that's what we find in ag markets, that, you're every farmer I've ever known, I used to work in ag country, gets ulcers, because you're damned if you get a great bumper crop and everybody else does, then price is just terribly low, and the price drop outweighs the increase in your yields, or there's so many ways your crop can get wiped out because pests or weeds or climate. There's just so many ways that can go wrong when you're a farmer, and so a lot of that is because of this price volatility. And then the U.S. has created a lot of ag insurance programs. The private market isn't necessarily going to provide enough insurance for farmers because of the volatility. They couldn't make money off doing that, so the government stepped in. I guess I should have labeled that Q1 and this Q2. Notice the strategy to show how the same quantity event affects price in the presence of an inelastic versus an elastic demand. I drew both cases through the same initial equilibrium, had the same supply event, and then we could see directly how different the price response would be. Sort of an interesting rhetorical strategy. I didn't make it up, but it's pretty common and useful.